Father, thank you, God, for this time as we continue to study the big picture of the Bible. Lord, I just pray that your Holy Spirit will speak through this next section. Thank you for your presence, God. Use this time, Lord, to not only help us to have a greater familiarity of the whole of Scripture, but draw us closer to you, Lord. Reorient our thinking. Bring us closer into alignment with you. In Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, anybody have any thoughts about the last section before we dive into the next one? So that last one was Genesis 12 to 50, talking about the first covenants. How about this for a quiz? What was the very first covenant made in the Bible that God made with people? Okay. It's a good guess. And I know that that section is called covenant, and it's talking about Abraham and the messianic covenant through Abraham. But there's actually covenants before that.
Very first one was in Eden.
Okay, that may be, but it doesn't necessarily use that term, so it's not explicitly stated there. So that might be reading into it. So I guess if we're going to say what's the first explicitly stated covenant where it says that God made a covenant? Give up? Noah, there you go. Yeah. He actually made a couple of covenants with Noah. First, he made a covenant that he was going to rescue him and his family.
And then
then
one not destroying the
then not flooding
water.
Exactly. So
Okay.
All right. Well, that was fun. I like those little guessing games. I don't know. That's what I like to do for fun.
I forgot about it.
Yeah.
No, I was not with John, we had no thing before.
Yeah. So the Abraham covenant, the reason why that's special, not that God not flooding the world again isn't special, because it's really nice that he's not going to do that. But that one was more tied to God promising to bless the whole world, all nations of the world through Abraham. Of course, the significance of that being Abraham beginning the nation of Israel, and out of the nation of Israel coming the Messiah. And you could say that all of what we're going to see in the Old Covenant is preparing for that. I know we've talked about the Old Covenants in purpose in terms of the law, showing us that we needed Jesus. But I think that's an important, difference, an important distinction to make or connection to make with the new covenant. But God was also preparing us preparing the way for Jesus by revealing his righteous standards in the law. It wasn't just, showing us that we needed Jesus. It was also just getting us to a place that, setting a context for Jesus to come into. And that's what's, when we say that the nation of Israel are God's chosen people, that's essentially what he chose them for, is to be the people that, through which he brought in the Messiah, and through which he prepared the way for the Messiah. Through the law, but also through just the whole history of the nation, the relationship that he had with those people, through the prophets, all of the above. So anyways, we're now in Genesis 12 through 50, seeing the the groundwork. Technically they're not a nation yet, but they're the sort of the what's this setting? I'm not thinking of the word I'm trying to think of, but he's made a setting for the nation of Israel to come out. And so we see some of the first examples of, real intimate, interactive relationship with God, with Abraham and his relationship with God. Isaac, we see some, we don't see as much with Isaac, and I've always kind of wondered about that. But we do see some of, that relationship with God that he had. And then certainly Jacob, goes on a whole adventure as well. And we see, God's relationship with him play out in a lot of special encounters. And then, of course, Joseph, and these are, to me, some of my favorite stories in the Bible, just because of the relationship that they had with God. Even as we've talked about, keeping in mind that our relationship is actually potentially so much more, in terms of intimacy, in terms of interaction, God's power displayed, all of the above, because of Christ. Nevertheless, those are some examples that have always encouraged me, the patriarchs, and of course Joseph. And Joseph has always had a special place because he's the dreamer, right? Yeah. And that's
he knew.
So that's been a special story to me for sure. Well, you guys have any thoughts on that section?
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's dive into the next lecture here.
Welcome back. This is chapter 3, the calling out. We will see that throughout the rest of the Old Testament, God will frequently say, I am the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt. And in our session today, that's what we'll be studying, how God does this. But let's review quickly. As I told you last time, we want to pick up on the Old Testament review, and so that you will keep these things fresh in your mind, that by the end of the class, you'll be able to recount them and remember the great story and how it unfolds. We started out in Genesis, the first 2 chapters of creation. God creates mankind in his image, man and woman, and he's got them there in the garden. They're fellowshipping with God. Things are very good. And then people sin repeatedly. Adam and Eve eat the forbidden fruit. Cain kills Abel. A terrible flood. The Tower of Babel. Then they have sinned against God, been kicked out of the garden. Now we have this crisis. That ends Genesis 1 to 11. Then in Genesis 12, suddenly God begins the salvation story. He makes this covenant promise to Abraham, land, descendants, blessing, that through you all the nations of the world will be blessed. And he said, I'll bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you. Then remember the rest of Genesis. Abraham has a son named Isaac. Isaac has a son named Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. They're going to become the tribes of Israel. But one of them, Joseph, the guy with the fancy coat, his brothers sell him into slavery. They goes down into Egypt. The family later in a famine follows them down into Egypt. He accepts them. And the book of Genesis ends in Egypt. Now we turn the page and we come to Exodus, and time has passed. 400 years has passed. And we're going to deal with Exodus 1 to 15, which is going to talk about the great Old Testament version of salvation. The deliverance out of Egypt that God carries out in these chapters becomes the prototypical paradigmatic picture of what salvation is in the Old Testament. The Exodus to the Old Testament is what the cross is to the New Testament. And repeatedly then throughout the Old Testament, God will say, I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt. And this lets us know that's his self-identification, that he is the one who saves his people. That's the way he wants to be known. That's the way he wants us to know his name. He is the one who saves and who delivers his people. Now, Exodus follows very tightly on the end of Genesis. As Exodus opens, they go back and rename the connection with Genesis, and the people that the different tribes who were down there and had settled now in Egypt. What's happened, of course, is that they have proliferated. That in Exodus, during the 400 years since the end of Genesis, God has fulfilled his promise to Abraham about numerous decisions, and that's going to be one of the big issues that creates the problem when we come to the opening chapter in the book of Exodus. The major characters in this story, Exodus 1 to 15, there's three major characters who dominate the story. While God, of course, is one of the major characters, Moses also is a major character, and then Pharaoh is the other one. And these three are going to be the central characters in these first 15 chapters. What's interesting, however, is that the Pharaoh is not named. The Old Testament writers are not shy about giving us names of kings. We have them throughout the Bible, and in Exodus we get the names of these midwives. So why is it that they don't name the Pharaoh? It's created all kinds of difficulties for historians and biblical scholars to try to figure out when did the Exodus take place, and we continue to argue about that even now. And the problem is we don't know which Pharaoh it was. And the question then is, why did they not give us his name? And I think it's because in chapter 5, when Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, the Lord says, let my people go, then Pharaoh says, who is the Lord? I don't know the Lord, and I'm not letting the people go. And so ironically now, here we are, 3,500 years later, and we don't know his name. And so we don't know who he is. So I think it's a little bit of a put down, a little literary slight of the Pharaoh, that they don't give us his name, but just this generic Pharaoh that we have. So at the beginning, okay, as we open the book, as I mentioned, time has passed, and the Abrahamic covenant is starting to be fulfilled. The Israelites are proliferating. They're spreading like crazy. Pharaoh, every time he takes his chariot out to where the Hebrews live, is another village has popped up. And so he decides things are getting out of hand. And so he wants to stop their population growth and make sure that he keeps them contained and well under control. Now, notice that he's starting to violate this promise that God made to Abraham, where God says, I'll bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you. So Pharaoh starts out, plan A, chapter 1, 9 to 14. We'll just work them so hard, we'll work them to death. So he gives them lots of work. They're building cities for him, and he has all this heavy construction. He thinks that will slow down the birth rate of the Israelites. But of course, God's hand is in that birth rate. And so they continue to spread, continue to proliferate. And he sees that hard work by itself is not going to do it. So he goes to plan B, where he orders all the midwives to kill all the newborn Israelite boys at birth. They're supposed to see when they go to the birth, if it's a boy, then they're supposed to kill the boy right there when it's born. I don't know if Pharaoh thinks he's going to get away with this, that everybody will think this is a natural death. But, somehow people would be able to figure this out, that all the boys are dying. But he gives that order to the midwives disobey, and then come back to Pharaoh and report to Pharaoh that the women are just healthy and gone before we can get there. And so God blesses these midwives for being obedient to him and not to the Pharaoh, and not killing these Hebrew boys. And so finally he comes to plan C, where he says that all of the newborn Israelite boys' birth are going to be thrown into the Nile River. Now notice what a horrific action this is, as he tries to keep the population of the Hebrews under control. Notice the severe violation that this is of what God told Abraham, I will bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you. And there can be very few things as horrendously wrong and a violation as the Pharaoh taking newborn Hebrew sons who are blessings from God and throwing them into the Nile River. And what we're going to see as the story unfolds is that God is going to react against this, and God's anger is going to be riled up, and we're going to see God responding, and that's going to be the stories that we see throughout these plagues. So now what happens, of course, is that God, what he's going to do is he's going to call Abraham, he's going to call Moses. And so in the next chapter or so, we have these characters, Moses, his mom, and the Pharaoh's daughter. So what what Moses' mom does, remember, she's worried that if they find out about him, he's going to get thrown into the Nile River and drown. So ironically, she puts him in a basket and sets him in the river. So it's kind of an ironic violation of Pharaoh's decree. And then adding on to the irony is that it's Pharaoh's daughter who finds him. And when she finds this baby there in the basket, her heart is touched. She realizes why that baby is there. This is one of the Hebrew babies. And so Pharaoh's daughter decides to keep him and raise him as her son, even allowing Moses' mom to come and nurse him. And this is going to give Moses a first-class education. The Egyptians are going to educate him. He's going to be the one who takes the Hebrew language and puts it into writing. He's going to write the Pentateuch. So Moses and this wonderful education that the Egyptians have given to him is going to be an important part of what happens. Also, the irony of Pharaoh's daughter being the one who keeps the one who is going to be the guy who leads these plagues and the actual destruction of Egypt is going to come up in the years to come. So from chapter 2:11 to 4:31, we see that God calls and empowers Moses. And so Moses has grown up as an Egyptian, but the story goes along. He kills an Egyptian who is beating one of the Hebrews, and then he flees. He runs away to Midian. This is not exactly the actions of the future hero, of Israel, who's going to deliver them. And there in Midian, he tells us he marries the daughter of a man named Reuel, who was a priest of the Midianites. And red flags ought to start to go up. We realize the Midianites are most likely Baal worshipers, and Moses has settled down with them. The Midianites will show up again when we get to the book of Numbers in a very negative light. But so he's there with them. Meanwhile, God tells us what he's thinking back in Exodus 2:23 to 25. And these are very important transitional verses that change the story dramatically. And in verse 24, God hears the Israelites groaning. Remember, they're in this terrible slavery and their babies are being killed. He hears them groaning and crying out in their slavery. And here's the text: he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. Remember, I told you how important that covenant was in the last session, that it's a promise God made to Abraham, promise of grace. And now he remembers, he recalls this covenant, and now God is going to act on this covenant. I'll bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you, and in you all the nations of the world will be blessed. So now we start to see God acting dramatically now to fulfill that promise that he made to Abraham. In Exodus 3:1 to 4:7, then God is going to reveal himself to Moses and calls him into action. And this is where Moses sees God in a burning bush, and he comes closer and closer, and God is in that fiery burning bush and talking to Moses. And this passage is going to bring together three major themes that are closely associated throughout the Old Testament and even into the New Testament. This is that God's presence and God's holiness and God's power are all interconnected and united as he draws close to God's presence. He sees the danger and the power and the fire, and that God tells him, this is holy ground. Take off your shoes. And so holiness emanates out around from this close presence of God. Then as God begins to talk to him, and as Moses finds out who he is, that he gives him the name I am, and this is going to be related to the name Yahweh. We need to comment for a minute on the names of God. We're going to see two primary names of God used throughout the Old Testament. Yahweh is the most frequent, and Yahweh is like his personal name. This is like what his name actually is. Our English translations, most of them will translate this by the Lord and put Lord all in caps, L-O-R-D, all of them are in caps. That's an indication of the use of the name Yahweh. The other name that's used up, like at the beginning of Genesis 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, that's the word Elohim. And Elohim is the word for God. It's kind of a generic word, like our English word God. If you put a little g on it, You can talk about the gods of other nations and other kinds of gods. So Elohim is that way. It just means God or gods. And Yahweh is the specific God. And Yahweh is related to his statement, I am who I am. And Yahweh carries that idea of his presence, that he's there with us, inherent in the meaning of the name. So what we'll see in Exodus throughout, and again in the Old Testament, God will say things like, I am Yahweh, your Elohim, or I am the Lord, your God. So I am Yahweh, your Elohim, who brought you up out of Egypt. And he's going to say this repeatedly throughout the Bible to remind them that their relationship is one of deliverance and one of salvation, that God has delivered them out of Egypt, and that defines the relationship that they have. So now we head into the plagues. God gets Moses to go back to Egypt with Aaron as his assistant and to confront the Pharaoh there. And he does this through this time of the plagues. And so when he first goes and announces to Pharaoh and tells him to let the people go, that Yahweh says to let the people go, then Pharaoh's going to refuse and say, as I mentioned before, who is Yahweh? Who is the Lord? So who is this God named Yahweh? That I should obey him and that I should let Israel go. I do not know Yahweh, and I will not let Israel go. What happens now is that this term, to know Yahweh, is going to become a central term throughout the whole rest of the book of Exodus. In 6:7, God says, I will take you as my own people, he's talking to the Israelites, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of Egypt from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And so this knowing Yahweh, he tells the Israelites, you will know that I am Yahweh when you get delivered. And he tells the Egyptians, you will know that I am Yahweh when you get crushed by the coming judgment and through these plagues. So everyone eventually will know who Yahweh is. And this theology, of course, continues. Everybody will know who God is at some point. Either you know him as deliverer and savior, or you know him as judge. And so at the end of the day, at the end of time, everyone comes to that knowledge of who God is. And that's one of the main themes that we see here in Exodus. So the judgment unfolds through a series of plagues that God sends on Egypt. And the plagues are interesting. While there's 10 of them, they come, they're not linear. They come in groups of 3. So we have these 3 cycles of plagues. And let me just point out the way some of the plagues relate. So the first 3 plagues, first he has the sign of a snake where he throws down his rod, it turns into a snake. You remember the magicians throw down theirs, they turn into snakes, but Moses' snake eats the other snakes. One of the significance, there's a lot of symbolism running throughout most of the plagues. That sign of the snake is that the Egyptians used the snake, especially a cobra, to represent Egypt itself. And in many of the crowns that the pharaohs wore, often you'll see a cobra right on the front of his crown, representing Egypt itself. So for Moses to have a snake that can eat the other snakes is a sign of his power, over Egypt and over the Pharaoh itself. It's probably the sign with the snake. But the plagues come, the first 3 that come, notice there's a plague of blood and of frogs and of gnats. Then is there a forewarning? We have yes on the first one, yes on the second one, no on the third one. And then what's the time sequence? In the morning, the first one, no time. The second one, no time. And the third one, and then his instructions. He says to confront Pharaoh, to go to Pharaoh, and then none. When we get to the second series, we have the exact same sequence, repeats itself. The second series is one of flies, livestock, and then boils. So as in the first 3, is there an order? Is there a forewarning? Yes, for the first one. Yes, for the second one. No, for the third one. When is it done? The first one's in the morning. The second 2, there's no time given. And likewise, the first one says to meet with Pharaoh, go to Pharaoh, and then the third one, there's none. So the second 3 follow the exact same pattern as the first 3. So we have these groups of 3, the first series, the second series matches the third. The third series is likewise similar. We have hail, locust, darkness. It is getting worse as it moves along. The kinds of plagues and the impact that they have seem to be growing worse and worse. But the same sequence, is there forewarning? Yes, for hail. Yes, for locusts. No, for darkness. When is it done? Hail in the morning. No time given for locusts and darkness. And then the same instructions, go and meet with Pharaoh, go to Pharaoh, and then none at all. The climax, of course, comes with the final one. That's the death of the firstborn. And is there a forewarning? Yes, but is there a time? No. And so this kind of brings things to its climax. Now, there's been a lot of discussion on the plagues, why these particular plagues, what's the point of them? Many of the plagues are direct attacks on the Egyptian gods. They're not all directly connected, but many of them are. Certainly, at the beginning, when the other thing that they connect to is the fact that Pharaoh had been throwing all these babies in the river. And so for this terrible, horrendous murder of Hebrew babies, some of the plagues are reminders of that. So it's no surprise at the beginning, what does he do? He turns the river into blood. Because of what Pharaoh had been doing by throwing babies into the river, God turns the whole river into blood. Another interesting plague connection is the one of frogs. In Egyptian religion, and some of the plagues are related to Egyptian gods in ironic kinds of ways. God has a sense of poetic justice and ironic. There's an Egyptian god named Heket, who is the god of newborn babies and pregnant women. And Heket is depicted as a frog. And so this frog represents this special god that's supposed to protect newborn women and newborn babies and pregnant women. And so to suddenly have all of these frogs kind of in an outcry and outrage coming out of the river and swarming the whole land probably is a reference to this frog Heket. And at the end, of course, the plague of darkness is a direct assault on the primary Egyptian god, which is the sun god. They worshipped the sun god. So the overall point of the plagues, all right, it's multifaceted. They demonstrate that God's ultimate power over Egypt, Pharaoh, and their gods, and they also serve as justice for the murder of the Israelite babies. So now what happens from Exodus 11:1 to 15:27, that 10th and final plague, the death angel, brings Pharaoh to his knees, and he finally capitulates and tells Moses to take the sons of Israel and go. And he tells them to hurry, and other Egyptians are giving them stuff, trying to encourage them to get out of the land before that any more damage is done. Then in 1238, we read that a mixed multitude went with them. Many other people went with them. And this is a fascinating text that numerous other peoples, and they mean nationalities, probably a wide range of nationalities, they join the Israelites and leave Egypt with them. So this is another interesting ethnic observation that the Israelites are never just kind of a monoethnic group. There are always other groups around, and here are other people from other places that were also probably living in Egypt now come out with them and leave Egypt with them. As the Israelites leave Egypt, we see the presence of God go with them. So now in a very real way, God is with them with a pillar of cloud in the daytime and a pillar of fire at night that leads them and shows them the way. So this is the manifestation of God's presence as he brings them out of Egypt. Then he brings them now to the waters of the Red Sea. And of course, now the Israelites, it looks like they made a mistake. The Egyptians changed their mind and they send the chariots, his chariot army out after them, and the Israelites are penned against the Red Sea. And so now, spectacularly, God will part the waters of the Red Sea, and the Israelites now know God as deliverer, and they pass through the Red Sea. The Egyptian chariot army follows them into the Red Sea, at which point God brings the waters back and drowns the entire army of the Egyptians. Now, notice God's poetic justice here. Pharaoh was throwing the Hebrew babies into the Nile River and was drowning them. Here at the end of the story, after God has destroyed Egypt with the 10 plagues, And people in Egypt are mourning the loss of their firstborn. Their crops are ruined, their animals are dead. And now the famous Egyptian chariot army, the entire army, God drowns them into the river and into the Red Sea. And you can see God almost asking Pharaoh, do you know who Yahweh is? Now, everybody knows, the Israelites know God as spectacular deliverer. The Egyptians know God as one who has avenged all the terrible things that they have done, that there is no real middle ground. So this part of the story ends with a song, and Exodus 15 contains that song, which celebrates God's great actions in delivering Israel out of Egypt. And in that song, they reference the point that God has brought them out of Egypt so that they can come into his presence, that he can have a relationship with them. And that's what's going to happen next. God delivers them not just to deliver them out of Egypt, but to bring them to a place where he can enter into a close relationship with them. We're going to see that in the very next chapter. So let's review where we are in the great story. We had creation. We had the crisis, the Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden, people are sinful. God starts the salvation story with Abraham in Genesis, promises the land, descendants blessing, numerous descendants, bless those that bless you, curse those that curse you. And then Abraham has a son named Isaac, Isaac a son named Jacob, Jacob's got 12 sons, one of them Joseph, guy with a colt, sold into slavery, goes into Egypt, family calls him to Egypt, we turn the page. Israel's in Egypt 400 years later, Pharaoh's oppressing them. God now responds to the Abrahamic covenant, and I'll bless those that bless you, curse those that curse you, and God now is going to save them in dramatic fashion. It's the spectacular picture of deliverance in the Old Testament, raises Moses, strikes the Egyptians with the plague, brings Israel out in a dramatic fashion, along with these mixed other multitudes. And now God is going to bring them to Mount Sinai, where he enters into relationship with them. So there's so much we can learn from that. God is oftentimes working behind the scenes. Sometimes we don't see what he seems to be doing that's visible, but God is always at work. He's always moving his plan. He always remembers his covenant. It always revolves grace. And he always wants to restore his people, to not only deliver his people from sin, but take his people to himself so that he can have a close relationship with them. And that's what's going to happen when we come to the next chapter, where God will crash down onto Mount Sinai and enter into a close, intimate relationship with the Israelites in Exodus 19.
All right. Let's dive into Exodus chapter 1.
These are the names of the sons, chapter 1. These are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. The descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor and brick and mortar, and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" The midwives answered, "Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive." So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people: "Every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live." Exodus 2. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." One day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw 2 Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. Now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away. Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked them, "Why have you returned so early today?" They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." "And where is he?" Reuel asked his daughters. "Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat." Moses agreed to stay with the man, who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have become a foreigner in a foreign land." During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. Exodus 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, "I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up." When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here I am." "Do not come any closer," God said. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Then he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. Go, assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt. And I have promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. The elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. After that, he will let you go. And I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed toward this people, so that when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any woman living in her house for articles of silver and gold, and for clothing, which you will put on your sons and daughters. And so you will plunder the Egyptians. Exodus 4. Moses answered, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? Then the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? A staff, he replied. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Then the Lord said, put your hand inside your cloak. So Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, the skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. Now put it back into your cloak, he said. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored, like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, if they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these 2 signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. Water you take from the river will become blood on the ground. Moses said to the Lord, pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. The Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. But Moses said, pardon your servant, Lord, please send someone else. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, what about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so you can perform the signs with it. Then Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, let me return to my own people in Egypt to see if any of them are still alive. Jethro said, go, and I wish you well. Now the Lord had said to Moses in Midian, go back to Egypt, for all those who wanted to kill you are dead. So Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and started back to Egypt. And he took the staff of God in his hand. The Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. And say to Pharaoh, this is what the Lord says. Israel is my firstborn son, and I told you, let my son go, so he may worship me. But you refused to let him go. So I will kill your firstborn son. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. But Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it. Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me, she said. So the Lord let him alone. At that time, she said, bridegroom of blood, referring to circumcision. The Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. So he met Moses at the mountain of God and kissed him. Then Moses told Aaron everything the Lord had sent him to say, and also about all the signs he had commanded him to perform. Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of the Israelites, and Aaron told them everything the Lord had said to Moses. He also performed the signs before the people, and they believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshipped. Exodus 5. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness. Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. Then they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Now let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, or he may strike us with plagues or with the sword. But the king of Egypt said, Moses and Aaron, why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to your work. Then Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are now numerous, and you are stopping them from working. That same day, Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers and overseers in charge of the people. You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw, but require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota. They are lazy. That is why they are crying out, let us go and sacrifice to our God. Make the work harder for the people so that they keep working and pay no attention to lies. Then the slave drivers and the overseers went out and said to the people, this is what Pharaoh says. I will not give you any more straw. Go and get your own straw wherever you can find it, but your work will not be reduced at all. So the people scattered all over Egypt to gather stubble to use for straw. The slave drivers kept pressing them, saying, complete the work required of you for each day, just as when you had straw. And Pharaoh's slave drivers beat the Israelite overseers they had appointed, demanding, why haven't you met your quota of bricks yesterday or today as before? Then the Israelite overseers went and appealed to Pharaoh. Why have you treated your servants this way? Your servants are given no straw, yet we are told make bricks. Your servants are being beaten, but the fault is with your own people. Pharaoh said, lazy, that's what you are, lazy. That is why you keep saying, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Now get to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce your full quota of bricks. The Israelite overseers realized they were in trouble when they were told, you are not to reduce the number of bricks required of you for each day. When they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron waiting to meet them, and they said, may the Lord look on you and judge you. You have made us obnoxious to Pharaoh and his officials, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us. Moses returned to the Lord and said, why, Lord? Why have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all. Exodus 6. Then the Lord said to Moses, now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country. God also said to Moses, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, where they resided as foreigners. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. Moses reported this to the Israelites, but they did not listen to him because of their discouragement and harsh labor. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites go out of his country." But Moses said to the Lord, "If the Israelites will not listen to me, why would Pharaoh listen to me, since I speak with faltering lips?" Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron about the Israelites and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he commanded them to bring the Israelites out of Egypt. These were the heads of their families. The sons of Reuben, firstborn of Israel, were Hanok and Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. These were the clans of Reuben. The sons of Simeon were Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. These were the clans of Simeon. These were the names of the sons of Levi according to their records: Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Levi lived 137 years. The sons of Gershon by clans were Libni and Shimei. The sons of Kohath were Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uziel. Kohath lived 133 years. The sons of Merari were Malai and Mushai. These were the clans of Levi according to their records. Amram married his father's sister Jochebed, who bore him Aaron and Moses. Amram lived 137 years. The sons of Izhar were Korah, Nepheg, and Zikri. The sons of Uziel were Mishael, Elzaphan, and Sithri. Aaron married Elisheba, daughter of Aminadab, and sister of Nashon, and she bore him Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. The sons of Korah were Asir, Elkanah, and Abiasaph. These were the Korahite clans. Eleazar, son of Aaron, married one of the daughters of Putiel, and she bore him Phinehas. These were the heads of the Levite families, clan by clan. It was this Aaron and Moses to whom the Lord said, "Bring the Israelites out of Egypt by their divisions." They were the ones who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, about bringing the Israelites out of Egypt, this same Moses and Aaron. Now when the Lord spoke to Moses in Egypt, he said to him, "I am the Lord. Tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, everything I tell you." But Moses said to the Lord, "Since I speak with faltering lips, why would Pharaoh listen to me?" Exodus 7. Then the Lord said to Moses, "See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. You are to say everything I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt, and with mighty acts of judgment I will bring out my divisions, my people, the Israelites. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it." Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded them. Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When Pharaoh says to you, 'Perform a miracle,' then say to Aaron, 'Take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake.'" So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Pharaoh's heart is unyielding. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes out to the river. Confront him on the bank of the Nile, and take in your hand the staff that was changed into a snake. Then say to him, 'The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to say to you, let my people go, so that they may worship me in the wilderness. But until now you have not listened. This is what the Lord says. By this you will know that I am the Lord. With the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water of the Nile, and it will be changed into blood. The fish in the Nile will die, and the river will stink. The Egyptians will not be able to drink its water." The Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the streams and canals, over the ponds and all the reservoirs, and they will turn to blood. Blood will be everywhere in Egypt, even in vessels of wood and stone. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. He raised his staff in the presence of Pharaoh and his officials and struck the water of the Nile, and all the water was changed into blood. The fish in the Nile died, and the river smelled so bad that the Egyptians could not drink its water. Blood was everywhere in Egypt. But the Egyptian magicians did the same things by their secret arts, and Pharaoh's heart became hard. He would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Instead, he turned and went into his palace and did not take even this to heart. And all the Egyptians dug along the Nile to get drinking water because they could not drink the water of the river. 7 days passed after the Lord struck the Nile. Exodus 8. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say to him, 'This is what the Lord says. Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will send a plague of frogs on your whole country. The Nile will teem with frogs. They will come up into your palace and your bedroom and onto your bed, into the houses of your officials and on your people, and into your ovens and kneading troughs. The frogs will come up on you and your people and all your officials." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the streams and canals and ponds, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt." So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land. But the magicians did the same things by their secret arts. They also made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Pray to the Lord to take the frogs away from me and my people, and I will let your people go to offer sacrifices to the Lord." Moses said to Pharaoh, "I leave to you the honor of setting the time for me to pray for you and your officials and your people, that you and your houses may be rid of the frogs, except for those that remain in the Nile." "Tomorrow," Pharaoh said. Moses replied, "It will be as you say, so that you may know there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs will leave you and your houses, your officials and your people. They will remain only in the Nile." After Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh, Moses cried out to the Lord about the frogs he had brought on Pharaoh, and the Lord did what Moses asked. The frogs died in the houses, in the courtyards, and in the fields. They were piled into heaps, and the land reeked of them. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the ground. And throughout the land of Egypt, the dust will become gnats." They did this. And when Aaron stretched out his hand with the staff and struck the dust of the ground, gnats came on people and animals. All the dust throughout the land of Egypt became gnats. But when the magicians tried to produce gnats by their secret arts, they could not. Since the gnats were on people and animals everywhere, the magician said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not listen, just as the Lord had said. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Get up early in the morning and confront Pharaoh as he goes to the river, and say to him, 'This is what the Lord says, let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you do not let my people go, I will send swarms of flies on you and your officials, on your people, and into your houses. The houses of the Egyptians will be full of flies. Even the ground will be covered with them. But on that day, I will deal differently with the land of Goshen, where my people live. No swarms of flies will be there, so that you will know that I, the Lord, am in this land. I will make a distinction between my people and your people. This sign will occur tomorrow." And the Lord did this. Dense swarms of flies poured into Pharaoh's palace and into the houses of his officials. Throughout Egypt, the land was ruined by the flies. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Go, sacrifice to your God here in the land." But Moses said, "That would not be right. The sacrifices we offer the Lord our God would be detestable to the Egyptians. And if we offer sacrifices that are detestable in their eyes, will they not stone us? We must take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God as he commands us." Pharaoh said, "I will let you go to offer sacrifices to the Lord your God in the wilderness, but you must not go very far. Now, pray for me." Moses answered, as soon as I leave you, I will pray to the Lord, and tomorrow the flies will leave Pharaoh and his officials and his people. Only let Pharaoh be sure that he does not act deceitfully again by not letting the people go to offer sacrifices to the Lord. Then Moses left Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord did what Moses asked. The flies left Pharaoh and his officials and his people. Not a fly remained. But this time also Pharaoh hardened his heart and would not let the people go. Exodus 9. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them back, the hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague on your livestock in the field, on your horses, donkeys, and camels, and on your cattle, sheep, and goats. But the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and that of Egypt, so that no animal belonging to the Israelites will die. The Lord set a time and said, tomorrow the Lord will do this in the land. And the next day the Lord did it. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, but not one animal belonging to the Israelites died. Pharaoh investigated and found that not even one of the animals of the Israelites had died. Yet his heart was unyielding, and he would not let the people go. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, take handfuls of soot from a furnace and have Moses toss it into the air in the presence of Pharaoh. It will become fine dust over the whole land of Egypt, and festering boils will break out on people and animals throughout the land. So they took soot from a furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out on people and animals. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils that were on them and on all the Egyptians. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said to Moses. Then the Lord said to Moses, get up early in the morning, confront Pharaoh, and say to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go, so that they may worship me. For this time I will send the full force of my plagues against you and against your officials and your people, so you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. For by now I could have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with a plague that would have wiped you off the earth. But I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show you my power and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. You still set yourself against my people and will not let them go. Therefore, at this time tomorrow, I will send the worst hailstorm that has ever fallen on Egypt from the day it was founded till now. Give an order now to bring your livestock and everything you have in the field to a place of shelter, because the hail will fall on every person and animal that has not been brought in and is still out in the field, and they will die. Those officials of Pharaoh who feared the word of the Lord hurried to bring their slaves and their livestock inside. But those who ignored the word of the Lord left their slaves and livestock in the field. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward the sky so that hail will fall all over Egypt, on people and animals and on everything growing in the fields of Egypt. When Moses stretched out his staff toward the sky, the Lord sent thunder and hail and lightning flashed down to the ground. So the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. Hail fell and lightning flashed back and forth. It was the worst storm in all the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. Throughout Egypt, hail struck everything in the fields, both people and animals. It beat down everything growing in the fields and stripped every tree. The only place it did not hail was the land of Goshen, where the Israelites were. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron. This time I have sinned, he said to them. The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. Pray to the Lord, for we have had enough thunder and hail. I will let you go. You don't have to stay any longer. Moses replied, when I have gone out of the city, I will spread out my hands in prayer to the Lord. The thunder will stop, and there will be no more hail. So you may know that the earth is the Lord's. But I know that you and your officials still do not fear the Lord God. The flax and barley were destroyed, since the barley had headed and the flax was in bloom. The wheat and spelt, however, were not destroyed because they ripened later. Then Moses left Pharaoh and went out of the city. He spread out his hands toward the Lord. The thunder and hail stopped, and the rain no longer poured down on the land. When Pharaoh saw that the rain and hail and thunder had stopped, he sinned again. He and his officials hardened their hearts. So Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not let the Israelites go, just as the Lord had said through Moses. Exodus 10. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I've hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these signs of mine among them, that you may tell your children and grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians and how I performed my signs among them, and that you may know that I am the Lord." So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts into your country tomorrow. They will cover the face of the ground so that it cannot be seen. They will devour what little you have left after the hail, including every tree that is growing in your fields. They will fill your houses and those of all your officials and all the Egyptians, something neither your parents nor your ancestors have ever seen from the day they settled in this land till now." Then Moses turned and left Pharaoh. Pharaoh's officials said to him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go so that they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not yet realize that Egypt is ruined?" Then Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. "Go worship the Lord your God," he said. "But tell me who will be going." Moses answered, "We will go with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, and with our flocks and herds, because we are to celebrate a festival to the Lord." Pharaoh said, "The Lord be with you if I let you go, along with your women and children. Clearly you are bent on evil. No, have only the men go and worship the Lord, since that's what you've been asking for." Then Moses and Aaron were driven out of Pharaoh's presence. And the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over Egypt so that locusts swarm over the land and devour everything growing in the fields, everything left by the hail." So Moses stretched out his staff over Egypt, and the Lord made an east wind blow across the land all that day and all that night. By morning, the wind had brought the locusts. They invaded all Egypt and settled down in every area of the country in great numbers. Never before had there been such a plague of locusts, nor will there ever be again. They covered all the ground until it was black. They devoured all that was left after the hail, everything growing in the fields and the fruit on the trees. Nothing green remained on tree or plant in all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh quickly summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now forgive my sin once more and pray to the Lord your God to take this deadly plague away from me." Moses left Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord. And the Lord changed the wind to a very strong west wind, which caught up the locusts and carried them into the Red Sea. Not a locust was left anywhere in Egypt, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward the sky so that darkness spreads over Egypt, darkness that can be felt." So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and total darkness covered all Egypt for 3 days. No one could see anyone else or move about for 3 days. Yet all the Israelites had light in the places where they lived. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and said, "Go, worship the Lord. Even your women and children may go with you. Only leave your flocks and herds behind." But Moses said, "You must allow us to have sacrifices and burnt offerings to present to the Lord our God. Our livestock too must go with us. Not a hoof is to be left behind. We have to use some of them in worshiping the Lord our God. And until we get there, we will not know what we are to use to worship the Lord." But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he was not willing to let them go. Pharaoh said to Moses, "Get out of my sight. Make sure you do not appear before me again. The day you see my face, you will die." "Just as you say," Moses replied. "I will never appear before you again." Exodus 11. Now the Lord had said to Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here, and when he does, he will drive you out completely. Tell the people that men and women alike are to ask their neighbors for articles of silver and gold. The Lord made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and Moses himself was highly regarded in Egypt by Pharaoh's officials and by the people. So Moses said, "This is what the Lord says. About midnight I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die. From the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, the firstborn son of the female slave who is at her handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle as well. There will be loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than there has ever been or ever will be again. But among the Israelites not a dog will bark at any person or animal. Then you will know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. All these officials of yours will come to me, bowing down before me and saying, 'Go, you and all the people who follow you.' After that I will leave." Then Moses, hot with anger, left Pharaoh. The Lord said to Moses, "Pharaoh will refuse to listen to you, so that my wonders may be multiplied in Egypt." Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go out of his country. Exodus 12. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, "This month is to be for you the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. You are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. That same night, they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roasted over a fire, with the head, legs, and internal organs. Do not leave any of it till morning. If some is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it: with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals. And I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. This is a day you are to commemorate. For the generations to come, you shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. For 7 days you are to eat bread made without yeast. On the first day, remove the yeast from your houses, for whoever eats anything with yeast in it from the first day through the 7th must be cut off from Israel. On the first day, hold a sacred assembly, and another one on the 7th day. Do no work at all on these days, except to prepare food for everyone to eat. That is all you may do. Celebrate the festival of unleavened bread, because it was on this very day that I brought your divisions out of Egypt. Celebrate this day as a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. In the first month you are to eat bread made without yeast from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day. For 7 days no yeast is to be found in your houses, and anyone, whether foreigner or native born, who eats anything with yeast in it must be cut off from the community of Israel. Eat nothing made with yeast. Wherever you live, you must eat unleavened bread. Then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go at once and select the animals for your families and slaughter the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it into the blood in the basin, and put some of the blood on the top and on both sides of the door frame. None of you shall go out of the door of your house until morning. When the Lord goes through the land to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the top and sides of the door frame and will pass over that doorway. And he will not permit the destroyer to enter your houses and strike you down. Obey these instructions as a lasting ordinance for you and your descendants. When you enter the land that the Lord will give you as he promised, observe this ceremony. And when your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? Then tell them, it is the Passover, sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt and spared our homes when he struck down the Egyptians. Then the people bowed down and worshipped. The Israelites did just what the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, Up, lead my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds, as you have said, and go, and also bless me. The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise they said, we will all die. So the people took their dough before the yeast was added and carried it on their shoulders in kneading troughs, wrapped in clothing. The Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and they gave them what they asked for. So they plundered the Egyptians. The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Succoth. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Many other people went up with them, and also large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds. With the dough the Israelites had brought from Egypt, they baked loaves of unleavened bread. The dough was without yeast because they had been driven out of Egypt and did not have time to prepare food for themselves. Now the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, to the very day, all the Lord's divisions left Egypt, because the Lord kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt. On this night, all the Israelites are to keep vigil to honor the Lord for the generations to come. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, these are the regulations for the Passover meal. No foreigner may eat it. Any slave you have bought may eat it after you have circumcised him, but a temporary resident or a hired worker may not eat it. It must be eaten inside the house. Take none of the meat outside the house. Do not break any of the bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate it. A foreigner residing among you who wants to celebrate the Lord's Passover must have all the males in his household circumcised. Then he may take part like one born in the land. No uncircumcised male may eat it. The same law applies both to the native born and to the foreigner residing among you. All the Israelites did just what the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. And on that very day, the Lord brought the Israelites out of Egypt by their divisions. Exodus 13. The Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me every firstborn male. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal. Then Moses said to the people, commemorate this day, the day you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because the Lord brought you out of it with a mighty hand. Eat nothing containing yeast. Today, in the month of Aviv, you are leaving. When the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Hivites, and Jebusites, the land he swore to your ancestors to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you are to observe this ceremony in this month. For 7 days eat bread made without yeast, and on the 7th day hold a festival to the Lord. Eat unleavened bread during those 7 days. Nothing with yeast in it is to be seen among you, nor shall any yeast be seen anywhere within your borders. On that day, tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. This observance will be for you like a sign on your hand and a reminder on your forehead that this law of the Lord is to be on your lips. For the Lord brought you out of Egypt with his mighty hand. You must keep this ordinance at the appointed time year after year. After the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites and gives it to you, as he promised on oath to you and your ancestors, you are to give over to the Lord the first offspring of every womb. All the firstborn males of your livestock belong to the Lord. Redeem with a lamb every firstborn donkey, but if you do not redeem it, break its neck. Redeem every firstborn among your sons. In days to come, when your son asks you, what does this mean? Say to him, with a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed the firstborn of both people and animals in Egypt. This is why I sacrifice to the Lord the first male offspring of every womb and redeem each of my firstborn sons. And it will be like a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead that the Lord brought us out of Egypt with his mighty hand. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He had said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. Exodus 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea directly opposite Baal Zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, what have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services. So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi Hahiroth, opposite Baal Zephon. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Moses answered the people, do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water, so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to the one side and light to the other side, so neither went near the other all night long. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He jammed the wheels of their chariots so that they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Then the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day, the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. Exodus 15. Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has hurled into the sea. The best of Pharaoh's officers are drowned in the Red Sea. The deep waters have covered them. They sank to the depths like a stone. Your right hand, Lord, was majestic in power. Your right hand, Lord, shattered the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you threw down those who opposed you. You unleashed your burning anger. It consumed them like stubble. By the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The surging waters stood up like a wall. The deep waters congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy boasted, I will pursue. I will overtake them. I will divide the spoils. I will gorge myself on them. I will draw my sword, and my hand will destroy them. But you blew with your breath, and the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who among the gods is like you, Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders? You stretch out your right hand, and the earth swallows your enemies. In your unfailing love, you will lead the people you have redeemed. In your strength, you will guide them to your holy dwelling. The nations will hear and tremble. Anguish will grip the people of Philistia. The chiefs of Edom will be terrified. The leaders of Moab will be seized with trembling. The people of Canaan will melt away. Terror and dread will fall on them. By the power of your arm, they will be as still as a stone until your people pass by, Lord, until the people you bought pass by. You will bring them in and plant them on the mountain of your inheritance, the place, Lord, you made for your dwelling, the sanctuary, Lord, your hands established. The Lord reigns forever and ever. When Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen went into the sea, the Lord brought the waters of the sea back over them, but the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. Then Miriam, the prophet, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her with timbrels and dancing. Miriam sang to them, Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why the place is called Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, What are we to drink? Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became fit to drink. There the Lord issued a ruling and instruction for them and put them to the test. He said, If you listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water. Exodus 16.
Yeah. Sir. Any commentary on any of that?
That's the love being destroyed in both places. Almighty our God is, and the same God that acted on behalf of Israel's abilities today. He's able to do the same kind of thing. We need to do this like himself, you know. The servant, pastor, you can receive that more.
I like the part where I probably shared this with you guys before, but Moses, called by God, and so he obeys and he goes and he talks to Pharaoh, and at first Pharaoh just makes the Israelites work harder for him. And so they get upset, and Moses goes back to God and says, "You haven't delivered these people at all." And you just kind of read that, knowing like the big picture. It's kind of like, well, not yet, but but just just relating to that, kind of, I guess, a myopic view of, that's how it feels when we're in the middle of things. It's just like, I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do and it hasn't worked yet, but God says, yeah, I'm just, we're just getting started here, right? The story is just beginning. And he, doesn't even respond to Moses' complaint in terms of even acknowledging that he hasn't done anything yet. It's just like, this is what we're gonna do next, and let's just keep going. So I don't know, I like that part. Any other thoughts?
No.
Well, I propose we stop here and pick up here next time.